Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. This time I'm taking a break from the budget loadouts and going over some endgame setups for higher level play and PvP fights. I've done a few videos now on setting up low cost kits for early and mid game raids, so in this one I thought it would be a nice change of pace to look at some higher level equipment. These are definitely not low budget kits, coming in at well over 200,000 rubles each, even though I did try and focus on lowering the price by using cost effective items, barter trades, and the flea market wherever possible. I'll be listing the full purchase price of each of these loadouts from the traders and the flea market, and they're going to be quite expensive simply because this is all high level gear. However, if you're at the point in the game where you're using high-end loadouts anyways, you should be able to cut your costs pretty significantly by bringing things you've already collected like backpacks, ammo, meds, magazines, helmets, headsets, and grenades that you've likely stockpiled away and should help you save money by being able to bring your own gear instead of purchasing it all. Keep in mind that these armor and equipment setups aren't specific to each loadout either, and can be used as base equipment for any setup. These are just 3 different combinations that I wanted to take a look at. I won't go into too much detail on the medical supplies for each loadout either, because I figure if you're already looking at endgame loadouts, you've figured out your preferred first aid setup by this point. I will be adding about 50,000 rubles onto each loadout, however, to account for the cost of meds and grenades, so I'm including those prices in each one. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at some late game loadouts for PvP, boss hunting, and hardcore high-end looting. This first loadout is one that I like to use while sneaking around solo and trying to push high loot areas to make huge profits. The VSS is, I think, somewhat of an overlooked weapon by a lot of players because it's kind of hard to use at longer ranges and it's stuck with a low ammo capacity. Despite this, the VSS has a few advantages that I think make it a very viable weapon. For one, the VSS is extremely simple to set up and is generally pretty cheap to purchase as well. In general, the weapon itself can be easily put together for well under 100,000 rubles and has low recoil without any expensive modding. It also has a very high fire rate, which means this thing is excellent at close range fighting around loot hotspots. While the gun itself is pretty cheap, the ammo choices for the VSS are kind of polarizing, because there isn't really a viable, cost-effective option to get through level 5 armor on the first shot. However, you do have access to some cheap ammo that will get through level 4 armor easily and quickly, and it melts higher level armor because of the high fire rate on the VSS. 9x39mm SP5 ammo recently got a pretty big buff, increasing its armor penetration to be basically on par with the 5.45 BT and 5.56 M855A1 rounds, and it also hits for 68 flesh damage, which is significantly higher than either of the other rounds I mentioned. This can make the VSS really deadly if you can reliably get headshots or keep your spray accurate on the chest and melt through armor. On top of this, SP5 ammo is actually crazy cheap, at about 150 rubles per round at the time of making this video, which is less than half of the cost of either of those other rounds I talked about. With that pretense out of the way, let's talk about the weapon build that I like to use. First, I check the flea market for the VSS, which usually only runs about 50,000 rubles, but there is a few barter trades for the weapon as well. I generally stick with the OKP7 dovetail reflex sight when I use the VSS, which is about 17,000 rubles from skier level 3, but you can also use the B13 mount or something similar to put your preferred sight on there. I honestly wouldn't recommend using a magnified scope unless you're a wizard with the VSS already, because the bullet drop is pretty severe at range and it's tough to use this thing as a sniper. If you want to add a foregrip and laser, you can buy the TOZ 6P29M mount from Jaeger level 3, which has 3 rails on it. Honestly though, the recoil is already so low on the VSS that you don't really need a foregrip, and you can save about 20 to 30,000 rubles if you just choose to skip this step. For magazines, I generally run a mix of 30 rounders and 20 round magazines, because the 30 round mags are kind of pricey at about 21,000 rubles a piece. For this loadout, I'll recommend 2 30-round mags and 3 20-round mags, but you can always change that up according to how much ammo you want at your disposal. For the ammo, you can load up a few mags of SP6 or higher if you want that extra edge against class 5 armor, but as I said earlier, you can generally punch through most helmets and melt body armor fairly quickly with SP5 alone if you're accurate with your shots, and you can buy hundreds of rounds of this ammo without spending too much at all. Next up, for the armor in this loadout, I trade 4 Aquamarine filtered water bottles for the ANA Tactical M1 armored rig from Ragman level 3. These water bottles can be created at the nutrition station in the hideout, or purchased on the flea market for a pretty decent price, making this rig a fairly cost-effective option for what it offers. The armor is class 4 and it covers the chest and stomach with pretty good mobility stats and a lot of space for mags, grenades, and extra loot in the big 4-slot pouches on the rig. I especially like using this rig on reserve when running the cliff extraction because of all the space it offers for extra loot. For a helmet, I pick up the MICH TC 2001 helmet from Peacekeeper level 2, giving you a solid class 4 head armor for about $450. For the headset, you can use whatever you prefer, but I personally like the Swordens for about 24,000 rubles from Ragman level 3. Finally, for the backpack on a high-end loadout, I would generally go with the Tri-Zip for a standard run for about 40,000 rubles from Ragman level 3. But if you want to really maximize your looting ability, you could also try out the gigantic new 6 SSH 118 backpack, which you can trade 2 military cables for at proper level 4, and it has the highest carrying capacity in the game. So if your main goal is to make some money and get loot, this is the backpack you want to use. When all the prices are added up, this loadout would cost you about 280,000 rubles and 4 Aquamarine water bottles for the armor trade. And if you think this one sounds expensive, just wait for the others on this list. At the end of the day, this is kind of a specialized loadout, but if you're looking for something that excels at close range fighting and sneaky looting, the VSS is definitely something worth checking out. This next loadout is going to be built around the RPK-16, a rifle that kind of exists in between a light machine gun and an assault rifle. For about 65,000 rubles at proper level 4, you can pick up a basic RPK-16, and it doesn't take much modding at all to get it almost on par with a fully kitted AK-74. The RPK takes the same ammo and mags as the AK-74 as well, so it's definitely something worth trying if you're already a fan of the AKs or are just looking for an effective assault rifle at a good price. For my standard RPK build, I just add a few parts to bring the recoil down, which makes it pretty quick to set up. First, I swapped the muzzle brake for the PWS CQB compensator, about 10,000 rubles from Skier level 3, which brings the recoil down by a lot. Next, I add the Magpul RVG foregrip, which is about $70 from Peacekeeper level 3 because it has a pretty good balance of ergonomics and recoil stats. I generally add an X400 flashlight as well, but that's up to you and what you like as a flashlight or laser. For the stock, I use either the HKE1 stock or the MFT BUS stock, both sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for about $90. Either of these will do the trick, and they both offer about the same recoil reduction as the more expensive MOE stock and rubber pad combo, but the HK stock is often sold out because it's become a really popular choice. Finally, you just need to add an optic, which is kind of up to your preference, but I generally just stick with an EOTech hollow sight because I like the reticle and the looks of it. For mags and ammo, I generally run one 60-round mag and 3 30-round mags, or alternatively one 95-round drum mag and 3 30-round mags as backup. The 95-round drum mag is sometimes cheaper than the 60-rounders, but it takes forever to load after it's empty, and it also brings your ergonomics down by a whole lot, so that's kind of up to you. I pack my larger mags with half BT rounds and half BS rounds because I like knowing that at least the first half of my first mag is hyper lethal, and then I just use BT rounds in the smaller mags and for my spare ammo. Once upon a time, I would recommend running just BS rounds for the entire setup, but now that it's about doubled in price, it's a little bit more practical to run some BS and the rest BT. Both of these bullets can be purchased from Proper, but I always recommend checking the flea market or farming boxes of this ammo from raids to save some money, since good rifle rounds will eat away your bank account if you keep on buying them. For the armor on this loadout, I have 2 recommendations depending on what mags you choose to use. If you just use 60 rounders, you can use the ANA Tactical M2 rig, and if you feel like checking out the drum mag, I would suggest using the M1 rig from the last loadout so you have a 4-slot pouch for the big drum mag. The M2 rig is another barter trade item from Ragman level 4. And will cost you 10 dog tags of at least level 20, again giving you class 4 armor and plenty of space for magazines and supplies. The M1 and M2 armored rigs are both good choices, but the M1 has a little more space for big loot or large drum mags. As a helmet for this loadout, I'm going with the Striker ACHHC helmet, about 57,000 rubles from Ragman level 3, and a sword and headset for about 24,000 rubles as well. This helmet is a decent price for class 4 head armor and lets you use comtacs, so I find myself using it a lot at higher levels. For a backpack on this one, you can stick with the Tri-Zip, or spend a bit more and pick up an Attack 2 for about 60,000 rubles to be able to loot more. For a total price if everything was purchased from the traders, you'd be looking at around 420,000 rubles plus 10 dog tags for the armor. but if you can craft or farm the ammo you need for this one, you can save potentially 100,000 rubles right there. What I like the most about this RPK-16 setup is that it's basically just as versatile and effective as a fully modded AK-74, but you can build it for cheaper and set it up quite a bit quicker. This means you don't have to sacrifice any combat effectiveness, but you'll spend less time in the modding menu and more time in the raid. For the last build in this video, I want to take a look at the M1A, which has become a lot more practical as a simple, powerful, and effective weapon since its price was reduced and overall stats were increased recently. The M1A can be purchased from Peacekeeper level 3 for about $660, or for the amazing barter trade of 8 USB adapters, which is a really common drop in filing cabinets on every map. And even in its most basic form, this gives you a very accurate rifle that fires the powerful 7.62 by 51mm round. The M1A excels at long-range shooting, but you can spam the trigger pretty fast for those close-range fights as well, so it's a pretty versatile rifle. While there is some dramatic and expensive changes you can make to the M1A, it's not really necessary to make this thing both accurate and deadly. For the weapon build itself, I just replaced the SOCOM 16 mount with the CASV 14 mount to add a full top rail and mounts for a weapon light. On top of this, I add the TA51 mount, a tan ACOG sight from the flea market, and an RMR backup sight on top of the ACOG. I specifically choose the tan colored ACOG because it's a common drop from weapon crates, and because of this is generally available for less than 20,000 rubles on the flea market, making it one of the cheaper 4x scopes. The TA51 RMR mount and RMR sight itself can all be purchased from Peacekeeper as well, and altogether this whole sight setup is only about 35,000 rubles. Next, I usually add an X400 flashlight, but if you prefer a different light or laser, go ahead and add that instead. That about covers it for the weapon mods, since you can't replace the compensator on the stock M1A barrel. For ammo and mags, I usually pick up 4 to 5 30-round mags from Peacekeeper level 4 for about $60 a piece, along with a few hundred rounds of M80 ammo, which, as I've mentioned in other videos, is a very cost-effective round for only about 230 rubles a shot. For armor on this loadout, I want to talk about the 511 TacTech plate carrier, which has become the most cost-effective class 5 armor in the game in my opinion, since it drops very commonly on scav raiders and the reserve scav boss, making it easy to find for a good price on the flea market. While there is a few barter trades for the TacTech rig, for this loadout I'll be using the average flea market price, which is about 100,000 rubles or sometimes slightly less for a good condition rig. While that sounds high at first, when you consider the TacTech is class 5 armor, one of the most effective in the game, and also gives you good magazine storage space, I think it's actually an amazing purchase and it has become one of my most used armors lately. By comparison, you're going to be spending at least 200,000 on a full condition Gen 4 or Reddit armor, and this one includes a tactical vest. Keep in mind though that this armor does not cover your stomach, so you need to be careful and not expose yourself too much during close range fights. For the helmet, I chose the Tan Striker ULACH helmet, sold for about 67,000 rubles by Ragman level 4. This helmet is essentially an upgrade from the ACH HC helmet and gives you better protection over the ears for only 10,000 rubles more. You can also still wear a headset with this helmet, and as usual, I recommend the Swordens if you have the money to spend. Finally, for the backpack, I want to give a mention to the Oakley Mechanism Bag, a new addition at Ragman level 3 that gives you a great compromise between the storage of an Attack 2 and the mobility and low profile of a Trizip or Beta 2. This bag is 32 slots, only 3 less than an Attack 2, but it's 20,000 rubles cheaper and is much more low profile. As a compromise, the space is broken up into smaller sections around the bag, limiting what items you can stuff into it. While it's not amazing for hauling loot from dead players, it is quite good at storing high value, small space barter items and letting you make a crazy profit without having a giant bag sticking up on your back. It might not be for everyone, but I use it a lot and I wanted to mention it as an alternative for people who want a bit more space than a Trizip while still wearing a low profile backpack. If every part of this build was purchased from the traders and flea market, it would total at just around 500,000 rubles, the most expensive loadout on this list because it uses no barter trades. However, you can drop this price by about 170,000 rubles or more if you make the barter trade for the M1A instead of purchasing it straight up, and use one of the barter trades for armor I mentioned earlier instead of bringing the TacTech rig. This loadout is definitely more focused on larger maps like Shoreline and Reserve, where an accurate weapon with a nice scope is really helpful, and the equipment lets you be quite mobile while still being well protected. If you enjoy making single accurate shots that have a good chance of killing on the first hit, then the M1A is definitely something you should consider as a simple but effective high-end weapon. Well, that about covers it for these 3 high-end loadouts, and I hope you found some useful stuff in here. Keep in mind that you don't have to follow these loadouts exactly, but at the very least you should have a grasp on some cost-effective high-end armor, equipment, and attachments to use with your own builds. I've been trying to stream more and more lately, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream as I fight my way through the cruel streets of Tarkov, so I'll leave a link for that down in the description. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.